August 10th, 2005. At 19,000 feet on the Rupal face of Nanga Parbat in Pakistan, Tomaz Humar watches a Pakistani Army rescue helicopter approach his position. The Slovenian mountaineer hasn't eaten in 6 days. His radio is nearly dead. His toes are turning blue from frostbite, but in minutes, he'll be rescued from certain death and turned into a national hero. Slovenia will erupt in celebration. But what nobody realizes is that surviving this day might be the worst thing that could happen to him. This climber is already dead. He just doesn't know it yet. Welcome to the extreme edge. Now, you might be wondering, why would surviving a rescue be the worst thing that could happen to someone? To understand that, you need to know what happened to Tomaz Humar 8 years earlier, because that's when his relationship with death in the mountains fundamentally changed. It was October 31st, 1997, and Humar was climbing Nuptse's west face, this massive 8,000-foot wall of ice and rock in Nepal, with his close friend Janez Jeglic. These two climbers were both rising stars in the Slovenian climbing community. Janez, in particular, was beloved by everyone. He was talented, experienced, and had a reputation for being one of the safest climbers in the country. For 5 days, they battled their way up this incredibly dangerous face. The weather was absolutely brutal. They could barely move for 4 straight days because of storms. Their stove developed a leak, which meant they were getting dangerously dehydrated. At one point, their bivouac tent got so compressed by falling snow that they almost suffocated inside of it. And they were doing all of this unroped. There was no safety connection between them. If one fell, the other couldn't catch him. It was bold, fast, and incredibly risky. On the 3rd night, Jeglic said something strange to Humar. He said, "If we climb this, we'll be happy for the rest of our lives. And if we don't, we'll make half of Slovenia happy." He was joking about the politics of Slovenian climbing, about the establishment that didn't always approve of their aggressive style. But there was truth in that joke. A lot of people thought what they were doing was needlessly risky. Nevertheless, on October 31st, they made their final push for the summit. They were climbing unroped, which meant there was no safety connection between them. Janez was slightly ahead, maybe 15 minutes or so, and at 1:15 p.m., Janez radioed that he'd reached the top. 15 minutes later, Humar arrived at the summit, but Janez wasn't there. What Humar found instead was a set of footprints in the snow that just ended, and Janez's radio lying in the snow where he dropped it. The wind on that ridge was absolutely ferocious, and somehow, in those 15 minutes between Jeglic reaching the summit and Humar arriving, a gust of wind had caught and blown him off the mountain. He fell thousands of feet down the south face and was never seen again. Now, Humar was alone at 25,400 feet, at the top of an 8,000-foot wall, with his partner dead and night approaching, and he had to get himself down. What happened next was absolutely brutal. Humar's headlamp died on the way down. He lost his snow goggles. He was hallucinating from exhaustion and dehydration. On top of that, an avalanche swept him off the face, and he somehow managed to stop his fall. It took him 2 full days to reach the bottom, and when he finally stumbled into base camp, he was suffering from frostbite, severe dehydration, and psychological trauma. Back in Slovenia, people mourned Janez's death. He'd been a favorite of many climbers, and while everyone recognized that Humar had survived something incredible, there were whispers. Some people blamed Humar for what happened. They said the wrong man had come back from Nuptse. Humar himself said he felt like the wrong man came back from Nuptse. The psychological scars went deep. In fact, from that point on, Humar climbed mostly alone. He couldn't bear the thought of losing another partner. Tiny detour on this chaos train. If you'd like to be a part of the extreme community, see exclusive videos made just for you, get early access to our other content, and vote on content polls, come join us on Patreon. See you there. The sad thing was, this wasn't his first brush with trauma, not even close. You see, Humar was born in 1969 in Slovenia, when it was still part of communist Yugoslavia. He grew up in a working-class family. His father was a builder who thought climbing was completely useless and dangerous. His first climbing harness was literally just a discarded Fiat seatbelt. But at age 20, something happened that would fundamentally change who he was. Humar got conscripted into the Yugoslavian Army and was stationed in Kosovo during the height of the Balkan ethnic tensions. What he saw there horrified him. He was serving alongside Serbs who were guarding ethnic Albanians, and the brutal treatment he witnessed went against everything he believed in. When his conscription ended and he asked to go home, the army didn't let him. Instead, they detained, brainwashed him, and maltreated him. And then they abandoned him at a Kosovo train station in a town that was hostile to Yugoslavian forces. When Humar returned home, he was shattered. He had severe post-traumatic stress syndrome, and his way of coping was climbing. People who have pre-existing trauma often use extreme sports as a form of self-medication. The adrenaline, the intense focus required to stay alive, it temporarily quiets the demons. But over time, you need more and more intensity to get that same effect. It's like an addiction. And I think that's what happened with Humar. He started soloing extremely risky routes that his climbing club members called death solos and sick. Mountain climbing wasn't just a hobby or passion, it was therapy and escape. The mountains were the only place where he could truly breathe. By 1999, Humar had become one of the most accomplished climbers in Slovenia. He'd won the Piole d'Or, which is basically the Oscar of mountaineering, for a climb on Ama de Blam, but his defining achievement came on Doligiri's south face. Doligiri is a 26,000-foot mountain in Nepal, and its south face is one of the most dangerous walls in the Himalayas, a 13,000-foot vertical rise with a 40% fatality rate. Reinhold Messner, who's one of the greatest mountaineers who ever lived, attempted this route twice and failed both times. He called it impossible, and in October 1999, Humar decided to climb it alone. No partner, no backup. For 9 days, he climbed that wall. At one point, a large rock hit his leg at 18,700 feet. It fortunately didn't break, but it could have ended everything. By day 8, he was at 25,600 feet, and the weather was turning deadly. The wind was ferocious. The cold was unbearable. His base camp radioed him. No one has ever done this before. It's time to start thinking about descending. And Humar, in his exhausted, oxygen-deprived state, looked at a photograph of his little boy, Tomi, that he'd brought with him. And in that moment, whether from exhaustion or lack of oxygen, Humar had a vision. He said he clearly saw young Tomi crooking his finger out of the picture and telling him, "Come home, Daddy." In that moment, he made a decision that probably saved his life. He said, "I realize in a flash, you're going to die. If you go on, you're going to die." So he turned around. He didn't summit, true, but he survived. Back in Slovenia, people celebrated anyway. Reinhold Messner, who is widely considered one of the greatest climbers who ever lived, said that reaching the top was secondary to what Humar had accomplished. He called it the most important ascent of the decade and declared Humar the most remarkable mountain climber of his generation. He had climbed higher on that face solo than anyone thought possible. Humar became Slovenia's Athlete of the Year. He received the honorary emblem of freedom from the president. He was so famous that if you addressed a postcard to just Tomaz Humar, Slovenia, it would reach him. He has everything: fame, recognition, and national hero status. But just a year later, in October 2000, something happened that should have ended Humar's climbing career permanently. He was building a house for his family in Slovenia. One dark evening, he stepped into an unfinished stairwell and fell 10 feet onto concrete. When he looked down, he saw his right leg twisted unnaturally across his chest. The femur was completely shattered. His left heel was crushed. The doctors said he'd be lucky to survive, let alone walk again. They discussed amputating one or both legs. Eventually, the doctors gave him their final verdict. He was going to be in a wheelchair for life. Climbing was impossible. His career was over. But Humar simply refused to accept the fate they decided for him. He refused to even stay in the hospital. He would sneak out in his wheelchair to wander the streets, and through what can only be described as superhuman willpower, he forced his body to heal. After nearly a dozen surgeries and a brutal rehabilitation regimen, he walked again, and almost immediately after, he went back to the mountains. By 2005, Humar had returned to elite-level climbing, and that summer, he set his sights on the highest mountain wall on Earth, the Rupal face of Nanga Parbat. Now, let me tell you something about Nanga Parbat. This mountain is known as the Killer Mountain, and it's for good reason. Before Erman Buell finally successfully climbed it in 1953, 31 people had died trying. Yes, you heard that right, 31. In 1934, a storm killed 4 German climbers and 6 Sherpas. In 1937, an avalanche buried 18 Sherpas and 12 climbers alive. It's one of the deadliest mountains in the world, and the Rupal face that Humar wanted to climb was a 15,000-foot vertical wall of ice, rock, and snow that requires some of the most technical and challenging mountain climbing on the planet. Reinhold Messner's brother died there. Messner himself called it the Mountain of Destiny, but Humar, for some reason, was confident. He even brought something unusual on this expedition. He brought an astrologer named Natasa, who had traveled from Slovenia specifically to read the mountain's auras and determine the spiritually favorable moment to begin climbing. I know that sounds strange, but Humar genuinely believed this stuff. He thought mountains had souls. He believed that with proper spiritual preparation, the mountains would protect him. His home was filled with crystals, Buddhist sculptures, Virgin Mary figurines, and pictures of Indian gurus. He used a pendulum to check his chakras before climbs. This was real to him. So on August 1st, 2005, when the clouds lifted at 3 p.m., Natasa said the moment was right. Humar started climbing, alone. For days, everything went according to plan. But on August 3rd, at around 21,000 feet, something went terribly wrong. Humar found himself in what he described as an ice maze. Essentially, it was a formation of overhanging snow and ice where every direction led either to impassable terrain or certain death. And then, without warning, the ground beneath him collapsed, and he fell into a hole. Somehow he managed to stop his fall and scrape together a tiny snow shelf to sit on. For the next 2.5 hours, he attempted to escape, but after moving maybe 300 feet, he gave up. The snow was too unstable. The entire structure felt like it could collapse. So he spent the night in this ice hole, collecting himself and trying to figure out a way out of the situation he found himself in. He didn't know yet, but this cramped ice hole was about to become his home for the next 6 days. On the morning of August 4th, at exactly 6:46 a.m., Humar's radio crackled to base camp. His voice was tense. Cannot move up, down, or right, only left. At 1:38 p.m., he radioed again. A rockfall had injured his arm and neck. Everything was soaked. He was in constant pain. He needed help urgently. He even sent a mayday signal to the Slovenian embassy, desperately hoping for any sort of assistance. And that's when this story became an international crisis, because back in Slovenia, something absolutely crazy started happening. You see, before Humar even left for Pakistan, his team had set up a website where they planned to post updates about the climb. This was 2005. Live internet coverage wasn't common yet, but the idea was that Slovenians could log on and follow along with his progress. When word got out that Humar was trapped, the website exploded. His team at base camp started posting hourly updates about his condition, what he was eating, how much battery life did he have left, where were the rescue plans, everything in real time. The site started crashing. They had to bring in 7 dedicated servers just to handle the traffic. In 1 week, there were 56 million visits. Slovenians stayed glued to their television sets and computers, following hourly updates about this man trapped on a mountain halfway across the world. Even the presidents of both countries got personally involved. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a matter of national pride and international diplomacy. Within hours, the Slovenian foreign minister was on the phone with his Pakistani counterpart. Pakistan's interior minister contacted the Army Aviation Division, and while they consulted experts and drew up plans for a rescue, Humar was fighting for survival in conditions that sound almost unimaginable. Every 5 minutes, avalanches thundered past him on both sides. The humidity was 95 to 99%. which meant nothing would dry. Not his sleeping bag, not his clothes, not his equipment. The temperature was between 14 and 19 degrees Fahrenheit, but the wind chill made it far worse. To stay alive, Humar had to get creative. He dried his socks by stuffing them under his armpits and blowing on them with his breath. When his backpack tore, he sewed it back together using a knife, thread, and his teeth. He slowed his heartbeat through meditation. He controlled his breathing. He entered what he called a special state, just to manage the raw terror. By day 4, his toes had turned blue. He massaged them with cream, terrified of frostbite. He slept headfirst in a U-shaped snow tunnel so he could use his elbows to push away the avalanches that repeatedly buried him. His food dwindled to 2 packets of soup, 5 pieces of cheese, and some prosciutto. He had 4 batteries left for his radio. On August 7th, his voice weak and breaking, he transmitted this message: "My 5th night in this icy trap has become unbearable. If this weather continues, I won't be able to hold on for much longer." I can only imagine the terror he must have felt in those moments, knowing that every breath could be his last, wondering if anyone would reach him in time. But help was on the way. The Pakistani Army had a plan, but it was insanely risky. See, for the first few days after Humar's mayday, weather conditions made any rescue attempt impossible. Heavy storms and thick clouds covered the mountain, but by August 9th, there was finally a break in the weather. The Army rushed 2 Lama SA-315B helicopters to the area. These are French-designed aircraft built for high-altitude operations. But even these specialized helicopters could barely operate safely at 19,000 feet under normal circumstances, so they stripped them down to bare essentials, removing anything unnecessary just to maximize lift capability. On August 9th, they made their first rescue attempt, but thick fog covered the entire mountain face. Humar could hear the helicopters as distant sounds, but he couldn't see them. The pilots flew close enough to see where Humar was, and they determined that the rescue was theoretically possible, but they needed perfect weather, perfect timing, and perfect execution. One mistake, and everyone would die. On the morning of August 10th, despite unclear weather and clouds still hiding Humar's position, pilots Lieutenant Colonel Rashid Ullah Baig and Major Khalid Amir Rana made their decision. They were going for it. By 5:45 a.m., they'd reached the mountain face and spotted Humar clinging to his narrow snow ridge. And what happened next is one of the most technically impressive pieces of flying I've ever heard of. The pilots approached at an angle, hovering with Humar at their 9 o'clock position. And here's where it gets terrifying. There's a gauge in helicopters that shows how much power you're using. At sea level, you might use 60 or 70% of your power to hover. But at 19,000 feet, where the air is so thin, that gauge was reading 98%. That means they were using almost every bit of power the helicopter had just to stay in the air. They had barely enough left to lift 150 pounds, about the weight of a backpack. The rotor blades were spinning just inches from the rock face. If a gust of wind had hit them wrong, if the pilot had made even the slightest error, the blades would have struck the mountain and everyone would have died instantly. They swung a knotted rope with a makeshift seat toward Humar. He reached out and grabbed it, but then something went wrong. See, in the whole chaos, Humar forgot to unclip his safety anchor from the ice screw he'd placed in the wall. So when the helicopter started to lift, that anchor was still attached to him. For a moment, the rope pulled tight between the helicopter and the mountain. The helicopter jerked violently sideways toward the rock face. The pilots were fighting the controls. The rotor blades were spinning toward the wall. In that split second, everyone watching from base camp thought they were about to see the helicopter crash into the mountain with Humar still attached. Then, the ice screw ripped free from the wall. The helicopter lurched back away from the face. Baig's skill kept them airborne. And for the next 10 minutes, Tomaz Humar dangled on a rope beneath that helicopter as they flew down to base camp. When they finally lowered him to the ground at base camp, the medics immediately examined Tomaz. He had mild frostbite on his hands and legs. He was exhausted. He hadn't eaten in days, but he was safe. He had no serious injuries. Well, no new ones anyway. Slovenia erupted in celebration. The Pakistani pilots received Slovenia's highest military honor for bravery. Many Slovenians urged Humar to run for president. He probably could have won. Reinhold Messner declared, "Tomaz Humar is one of the best and toughest mountaineers, and he will succeed." It looked like a miracle, but not everyone saw it that way. Some members of the international climbing community responded very differently to Humar's rescue. One prominent American climber wrote, "Now every ill-prepared sad sack whose ability falls short of his Himalayan ambitions can get on the radio, call for help, and expect the cavalry to save the day." Other climbers even believed Humar was less a cutting-edge alpinist than a grifter trying to compete rather than making sound decisions. 1 month after Humar's rescue, Steve House and another American climber named Vince Anderson climbed the Rupal face in what many saw as a deliberate rebuke. They did it in exemplary lightweight alpine style. No media coverage, no website updates, no rescue, just a clean, fast ascent that made Humar's highly publicized ordeal look like a circus. The criticism stung deeply, and maybe that's what led to what happened next. Because Humar didn't stop taking extreme risks. Instead, he just stopped publicizing them. For example, in 2007, he made the first ever solo ascent of Annapurna's south face, one of the most dangerous walls in the world. But this time, he told almost no one. The world didn't know until he called from the summit. No media coverage or website updates or fanfare. He'd learned the wrong lesson from the criticism. He wasn't climbing more safely, he was just climbing more secretly. November 2009. Tomaz Humar arrives quietly in Nepal. True to his new style, almost nobody knew he was there. He'd come to attempt a climb of Langtang Lirung's south face, one of the most dangerous routes in the region. He was doing this solo. No climbing partner, no Sherpas guiding him, just Humar and the mountain. Now, you might not have heard of Langtang Lirung. It's not Everest. It's not even in the top 50 highest peaks in the world at 23,711 feet. But here's what you need to know about this mountain. Out of 51 attempts to climb it, only 14 succeeded. That's a 27% success rate. 16 climbers had died there, 13 of them buried in avalanches. And the south face that Humar was attempting hadn't been successfully climbed since 1995. Humar's plan was simple. Climb the south face alpine style, fast and light, carrying minimal equipment, establishing camps as he went, reach the summit, descend, prove to himself and the world that he was still one of the greatest climbers alive, but this time without the media circus that had surrounded Nanga Parbat. So, on November 5th, 2009, Humar left base camp and started up the mountain. At base camp, only his cook, Jagat Limbu, remained, monitoring his radio calls. For 2 days, Humar moved steadily upward. On November 7th, he reached 20,000 feet and established a bivouac on a ridge. Everything was going according to plan. He was making good time, the climbing was difficult but manageable, and the weather, while not perfect, was holding. On November 9th, at approximately 20,700 feet, Humar made a decision. He radioed Jagat at base camp, and his words tell you everything. "I'm here. It's not possible. I come down." He was descending. He'd read the signs, the weather turning, the difficulty ahead, the risks mounting. And he made the right call. Just like on Doligiri in 1999, when he saw his son's photo and turned back. Just like he'd learned to do, he was coming down. But something happened during that descent. I can't exactly tell you when it happened. All we know is when he radioed Jagat later that day, his voice carried information that made Jagat's blood run cold. He had an accident. He had a broken leg, a broken back, and rib injuries. He probably must have fallen during the descent, slipped on ice, missed a foothold, we'll never know. And at 20,700 feet, on a mountain face that hadn't been climbed in 14 years, those injuries were catastrophic. Humar was facing a reality he'd somehow avoided since 2005. This time, no miracle was coming, no international crisis, no presidents making phone calls, no 56 million people are watching online, just a man alone on a mountain, dying. I can only imagine what must have been going through Humar's mind in those moments. Did he think about Nanga Parbat when the helicopters had saved him? Did he think about his children? Did he realize, finally, that the mountains he believed had souls didn't actually love him back? Somehow, impossibly, Humar survived that night, and in the morning of November 10th, he gathered enough strength to make one final radio call to Jagat Limbu. His voice was so weak that Jagat had to strain to hear him. Humar managed only a few words before the transmission ended. "Jagat, this is my last." And then, silence. The line went dead. Tomaz Humar never transmitted again. For 4 agonizing days, rescue teams searched desperately. On November 10th, a helicopter swept the south face but saw nothing. The weather was too poor, the visibility too limited. A strong Sherpa team deployed immediately, working as fast as humanly possible, fixing ropes and climbing nearly 1,600 feet up toward where Humar said he was, but they couldn't find him. He wasn't there. On November 12th and 13th, poor weather, heavy snow, and avalanche danger made any further rescue attempts impossible. A Swiss rescue team from Zermatt flew to Kathmandu for a rescue search, but all they could do was wait for the weather to clear and pray they'd find him alive. On November 14th, after 3 hours of searching from the air, they finally spotted something. But what they found didn't make sense. Humar's body was at 18,400 feet, 2,300 feet lower than where he'd said he was, and he was much farther left than expected, in a completely different part of the face. The body was frozen completely solid. The broken leg was visible even from the helicopter. How did Humar end up so far down? Did he somehow, with a broken back and broken leg, crawl or drag himself down that mountain for 4 days, trying desperately to reach a lower altitude where helicopters could rescue him? Can you imagine that kind of willpower, that kind of suffering? Moving inch by agonizing inch down a near vertical ice face, bones shattered, knowing you're dying but refusing to give up? The steep, rocky terrain where he was found makes that seem almost impossible, but we're talking about a man who walked again after doctors said he'd be in a wheelchair for life. Or did he take a second catastrophic fall sometime after his final radio call? Maybe he was trying to descend, weak from injuries and exposure, and lost his grip, tumbling down the face until his body finally stopped at 2,300 feet below. But if that happened, why was his clothing undamaged? Why was his equipment intact? A fall that long should have destroyed everything. We may never know exactly what happened. What we do know is that when they recovered his camera, they found the last photographs Humar had taken, and these photos break my heart. They showed the view looking both up and down an extremely steep couloir. Up toward the summit he'd been trying to reach, down toward the base camp he would never see again. Even at the end, even knowing he was dying, Humar had been looking in both directions, facing a choice, and based on where they found his body, it seems like he'd been trying to go down. He'd been trying to survive. He'd been trying to come home, but this time, the mountains he believed in didn't let him. I think about the man who survived Kosovo and came home damaged. He watched his best friend get blown off a mountain summit and had to descend alone while hallucinating. He fell 10 feet onto concrete and was told he'd never walk again, then forced his body to heal through sheer willpower, who got trapped at 19,000 feet for 6 days and was saved by what many considered an impossible rescue. And I think about how each time he survived, it might have reinforced this belief, conscious or unconscious, that he was protected, that the mountains he believed had souls actually favored him, that he could keep pushing because the universe would keep saving him. There's a fine line between determination and compulsion, between courage and recklessness, between pushing limits and ignoring them. Humar's story makes me wonder if surviving death sometimes doesn't save you, it just delays the inevitable while making you believe you're invincible. Tomaz died in the only place that gave him the only peace he'd known since Kosovo. And while his death is tragic, there's something deeply human about his story. A man searching for escape from his demons in the most extreme places on Earth, finding both salvation and destruction in the same vertical world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.